All right, welcome to Sphere Status. Today we're going to be talking about wokeness and worldview analysis, stopping the spread of wokeness, how we actually do that, how AI will turn movie buffs into filmmakers, and new upcoming movies that I'm looking forward to. Let's get started. First is, here's who I am. I help people, every Christian, understand that they have a core role to play in God's plan for history, and that ultimately Scripture is society's building codes for being able to do what God has been calling us to do. And Christians, it is Christians that who must bring godly order to society, or our grandchildren will suffer from our neglect. And so that is ultimately who I am. If you can join me here on Sphere Status, like, comment, and share. Sphere Status is where we're taking one of the spheres of society that God has made, and we're taking a worldview analysis of what's happening on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on those spheres. On Thursdays at 7 o'clock, we'll be live. And so today, as we're talking about culture right now, there's so much going on, and so I just have a smattering, as I mentioned at the beginning. So let's get started. So ultimately, the first thing that I want people to know is that there's a lot of different things going on right now in culture. And so here's something that to recognize: there is a significant difference between right culture and left culture, and unfortunately the right is still behind on creating culture. And so this is a funny little meme to kind of demonstrate this. We've got Hulk Hogan and we've got Mark Ruffalo, who's funny enough, from Kenosha, who plays the Hulk in the Avengers show. And so pretty much I prefer our Hulk over the leftist Hulk, although I do like the Marvel comic of Hulk. And so ultimately, we got to ask this question: what is going on right now? What is this thing in which we are dealing with that's wokeness? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. What's great is that we have actually made significant progress in fighting wokeness. The New York Times admits that woke ideology is losing its grip on the country, and it is beautiful. And so there's so many different things that we have to talk about exactly. But what exactly is wokeness? So I want to just give you a quick overview of really what wokeness is. At a basic level, wokeness is where there is a group of individuals who are weaponizing sexuality, the ability to understand truth, and the ability to have decision-making of what you're going to do. They weaponize that against Western culture, okay? Gender roles, sexual roles, what we're supposed to do, law, and it's ultimately trying to destroy the West. What is the West? The West is the group of people that came from basically from the Near East culture. So we're talking Jerusalem, and then the Athens area of Greece, Rome, and then of course you've got the European West, right? The European states: England, France, Germany, Spain, of course, and the Netherlands actually is a big part of that, even though we didn't really know that until they came over to America, and it made a big splash in America. And then, of course, America is birthed out of that culture, that European culture, that Western European thought into American, and then America took it a step further and actually went and tried to understand the basis of how we understand authority. And authority is not just derived from our history or those who have come before us. History is important, but it doesn't determine truth. The Bible determines truth, and our ability to reason based on it and operate based on independent liberty, on conscience of what the Bible says, is how we have American freedoms protected by law today. And so what wokeness is trying to weaponize the basic aspects of being a human against the West so that they can destroy it. And so ultimately what that is today is called cultural Marxism. And cultural Marxism being the core ideology of communism, is that there is a group of people who have and the group of people who do not have, or the group of people who are in leadership and the group of people who are workers. And so in the pure Marxist sense, it was an economic discussion about whether or not you had power and you had money, power and money, and then whether you didn't. And so what it did was create this false idea that anybody who has power is immediately an oppressor, and anybody who is not in power are the oppressed. And the oppressor is always those who are attempting to control everybody else. And the oppressed are the pure, as the driven snow, as we're going to experience this week, the pure group of people, the minorities who have just been oppressed by the majority. And so this is the construct. And while there certainly are people who are tyrannical over others, and while sometimes in certain cultures in particular, class is a big part of that, how they think of class warfare between the different classes. In particular, in America, this has mutated to specifically be between the white group of people, Europeans, because we all came from Europe, who made America ultimately and actually built America's core and our founding principles. And it's weaponizing our ethnicity against us. The fact that we're European versus everybody who's non-European, minorities, right? And so what that immediately means, using a Marxist framework, is that all white people who have been in charge are oppressive to minorities, inherently and actually fundamentally. It is a pivoting, a perversion of what Christians would call original sin, in that we all have the sin nature, and that despite our best efforts, we sin. And so sin is an archery term. It means miss the mark, and God's mark is perfection based on his law, which is an expression of his nature. And so we miss the mark on exactly hitting the way God has made us and commanded us to operate. And so we sin, right? Well, we all do that fundamentally by nature. Even a baby does that fundamentally by nature. And so they have original sin. Well, they have transferred that concept of original sin to cultural sin, in that those who are inherently part of the leadership culturally, the group, the majority of people, it doesn't even need to be anybody actually in formal leadership. Just the fact that you claim majority status inherently makes you an oppressor. That includes whether or not you are a man. If you're a man, you're immediately an oppressor, because they don't believe in hierarchy based on the God's determined role for how society ought to work, including the biology, including the family. Men's supposed to take charge and be the leaders without being overbearing, but that's how God designed it. Men are supposed to be the heads of their home. Well, that is the opposite of the Marxist, cultural Marxist agenda, which is using postmodernism to rewrite truth. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism is the belief that whatever we determine is true as a group of people is reality. And so there is no such thing as ultimate or knowable truth. Everything is relative to the perceiver of the truth. So this mic is not really real. It's only real to the degree that I can perceive it's real. And so this is the fundamental discussion that has been it is a offshoot of Greek thinking that has been distorted in modern age, which is very popularized in the movie The Matrix, in which we get a very distinct technological description of Plato's cave, which is differentiating between what it really exists and what is a projection of that reality which is like a computer simulation, right? And so what they believe is that all of life is technically speaking not fully knowable. And so since it's not fully knowable, everything is kind of relative to the perceiver. And so if there's no such thing as my original intent for anything I say, any writing or any speech or any action that I do does not have a canonical meaning or canonical intent, meaning I can't be seen as the author and therefore the determiner of what I'm intended to say. You as the listener get to determine what I'm intending to say and what ultimate truth is, which is, of course, relative to you, the listener. So postmodernism makes truth relative to the hearer or to the person receiving a message. So that same is applied to a Marxist construct, because anybody who's in charge is the orderer or communicator, and the receiver or the perceiver is the pure underclass, who then is oppressed by whatever message is being pronounced to them. And so to protect the masses, they need their safe spaces. And then they need to control your microphones and your words that you type out on a screen, because you could be oppressing some people. And they go a step further and actually saying that you are fundamentally harming their personhood. You are murdering people by simply disagreeing or saying something to that person that person perceives as offensive. This is what wokeness is. So it's fundamentally the systematic destruction of what we believe to be true and of the structures of society that hold us together, particularly in the West. Family, sexuality, civil order, what justice is, the proper process of justice, and what you'll see, which is what's going on in Minnesota, which is what happened even during 2020 over there in Minnesota, is that the people there believe in what's called street justice, which means there's no law. It's whatever happens on the street. It's survival of the fittest. If I can, harm you before you harm me, that's life. And so there's no such thing. And anybody who's trying to control that is an oppressor of them, no matter how lawless they get. And so this is why what's going on over in Minnesota is happening. This is why we get the Rainbow Rebellion. The whole point of the Rainbow Rebellion is to push back against all constraints, biological or social, societal, and allow yourself to do whatever you want, which is why the plus is there. Everybody knows about this who's been paying attention. The plus is there for a reason. It doesn't just stop with the LGBTQIA. It goes into very, very, very dark places, which I can't mention on mic, but we will be talking about. So, Hollywood, being the fact that the left is the particular group of people who are pushing this message, because the left is about demos, the democracy, the people. But it used to be American people. Now it's the global people, the global ethos. And so they're trying to bull rush our culture with immigration, illegal immigration, which is going to change the culture and change our ability to order ourselves, our society, and fundamentally destroy what? The systems that prevented that from happening. Biblical order for society, for biology, ultimate truth, and our systems of law and order. And so wokeness through media is a big part of this push. And we've been paying attention to this as a society, and we've started to push back. But we have a lot of work still to do. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Christians out there who are very easily susceptible to wokeness, because wokeness intends to appear, of course, like an angel, right? It intends to purport itself as to help the downtrodden, to help those in need, to help those who have had a difficult life, to help those who have been harmed and hurt, to help those who have been suppressed and oppressed. And so it's very easy for the mercy ministry of Christianity to start sucking up cultural Marxism and thinking that it's biblical order, but it isn't. It feigns like it is until it actually starts to get applied, and it isn't at all. And so what we're now seeing is churches engulfing this. And so why I'm talking about this ultimately is because we have to start being able to differentiate when we consume media, what is influencing and how we're thinking about it, particularly our children and our teenagers and our college students. The next generation is incredibly susceptible to this because their whole generation, and my generation technically speaking, has been raised to believe ethics that do not derive themselves ultimately from Scripture. Not everything, but a large portion of modern public, what is PC, public, politically correct, is not set by Scripture, but by Marxism, cultural Marxism. And so our job as parents, as teachers, as pastors, ultimately as people in charge of discipling the next generation, is to not only know for ourselves the difference in what wokeness is and how to define it and how to recognize it and how to call it out, but to help the next generation learn to do that as well and learn to know why. And so we have to be able to, as we're sitting and enjoying media, we can enjoy shows that don't fully reflect our worldview, but we have to have very clear biblical lenses for interpreting what we're seeing and hearing. We have to set that, or it will be set for us. And when we are watching these programs, we have to actually have discussions about what we're seeing. And so this is where it's very important. Now, some people have why don't we have the discussion afterward? I do like to interact occasionally just a little bit with when I'm watching live with something. But I understand that not everybody likes to do that. Okay. And I understand why. We want to get through the whole narrative, right? Which is important. But we have to start actually breaking out and thinking. Don't sit in the theater and just veg. That's a recipe for deception. That's a recipe for being deceived. We don't want to do that as Christians. And if we do that, we're in trouble. Our society's in trouble. So Netflix had this whole show that just finished in December on Christmas that has been extremely popular, that I enjoyed myself, especially early on in the show's life. And that, of course, would be Stranger Things. Now, you might not be fully familiar with Stranger Things, and it might not be your thing. That's okay. Not everybody likes the sci-fi, horror, Steven Spielberg, Stephen King genre, right? Or, the 80s genre of these types of thriller films. And so it might not have been your thing, and so you just didn't get involved. That's okay. Or maybe you just didn't have time. But Stranger Things started off incredibly. Stranger Things was really a great show that had a great cast explaining things that were very true of the 80s, nerd culture of the 80s, what it was like, and even the rest of society in relation to the nerds. And the nerds, of course, were playing D&D and, enjoying Lord of the Rings and all these types of things in the 80s, which were great. And the ultimate adventures that they would have. And of course, in this case, being kind of a sci-fi thriller type thing, there is a monster that is been birthed, and there's government conspiracies and experiments happening with kids, kind of like X-Men. Actually, a lot of this is very similar to X-Men. I think they probably even drew upon some of that. So there were experiments on children, and some of these children ended up with powers. Some of them didn't make it. Some of them did. And so very similar to X-Men, there's essentially mutants. And then one of them has been, in particular, been rescued by the group of people who are in the town. The kids pretty much find them. Her name is Elle, or 11. She was tattooed in 11. And so 11, as a character, is a heroine, but she has been, messed with to be able to have these powers. And she doesn't really know about them. She doesn't know anything about the world. And so the boys get to know her and show her all the adventures of the world. And in the process, she didn't know that she had accidentally barged into another dimension in which there are all sorts of creatures and a darkness in which that darkness was there. And so it's a great archetypal story. There's lots of great archetypal meaning all throughout this show. And so through every season, you get a new angle at it. Unfortunately, they had been developing storylines, of course, to do this. Of course, that's what Netflix does. They take a great show and they swap it out with gay stuff. Or any kind of other kinds of woke things to the degree that they can. And so then this is their objective, because this is what they ultimately need to do. They need to continue to deceive the people through the media. And as we are consuming it, because this is the media of our age, this is what we learn. This is what our children will be exposed to, and their friends. We have to know how to interpret it and understand it. Well, going through the show and being, of course, a fan of it myself, I was noticing the storylines. And so this is one of the discussion points that you have to have. And as a Christian, you have to determine the culture of direction of the culture you want to engage. You have to come up with your standards of what you want to consume and what you don't. And so, and where that breaks out. I don't believe in having extremely strict standards for this, because ultimately we have to understand the world in which we live in. And so a lot of times watching these things is never just for entertainment purposes. It is also to understand the world in which you live, the thought process that are there to a degree. Because objectionable content, there are certain things that Christians should not be consuming. Obviously, nudity is ultimately nudity, sexuality, things like that. Egregious constant violence or certain types of things to an extreme degree, right? And so it takes wisdom for us to interact with the media, the narratives, if you will, the mythologies. That's what actually these things are, of our day. And if you object to that being the fact that these aren't like mythologies, they are very much mythologies. And so when you actually study story, as I have, and it's a major component within history, as my background is, there is a significant connection between mythology and archetypes, the stories we tell, and the way in which we're going to understand our world and navigate it. And so when we watch a movie, it helps us to be able to have something like Pure Flix or something like that allows us to watch Clear Plays, what they used to be beforehand, where it allows us to watch and participate in the narratives of our culture without being too overly stimulated by sinful content. Right? And so that's a discussion that we should continuously have as Christians. To what degree should we allow certain things? To what degree should we watch this? And so in this show, there was beginnings of LGBTQ relationships in the show, as almost every TV show on the planet that you're going to watch in the modern century will have. Actually, really over the last 10, 15 years, this has been a major push. And even more so after 2020 when the Rainbow Rebellion fully expanded. And so now we have an opportunity. We have to wrestle with our conscience. To what degree can it get before I should probably not continue to watch it, not to continue, as I like to say, patron the show or film, right? And this is where we need to take our worldview convictions, and we need to take where we're at with our own conscience and where we're at with what that means culturally, right? And we need to be wise in our applications. And so my breakdown of how I determine, particularly for LGBTQ hyper woke stuff in media as a Christian, is it a main part of the storyline? Or is it an offshoot character that they occasionally venture just to basically give inclusive vibes to that community, which is dumb in and of itself, and of course very helpful to understand our age, what's going on. But is that what's going on, or is it the main thrust of the show? Or is it becoming the main thrust of the show or movie? And obviously, sometimes you can't always sniff out everything before you consume it. The point is you have to engage with the media, and not everything you're going to be able to know beforehand. Now, that would be if it's happening live. You can use Plugged In Movie Review, which I highly recommend. If you're not familiar with Plugged In, funny enough, there have been people that I know that are not familiar with this, which is shocking to me because I grew up on this. Plugged In Movie Review is focus on the family, the evangelical ministry that is extremely important in our day and age. Especially, it was a real large part of my growing up years is all the different things like Avengers and Odyssey and other programming and great ministry that they do. Plugged In Movie Review is a great place for you to go and look up various content and movies that allows you to see what's going on and at least be aware, be armed with awareness on what's coming next in the media that you're about to consume, and maybe even choose to not participate, right? And again, that's going to be where you draw that line. And so you can go to Plugged In Movie Reviews and get reviews. You can search up here. There is also, of course, IMDb, which is Internet Movie Database. This is where I typically go as well to get my reviews. You'd be surprised. IMDb does a fairly good job with explaining various movies and content. So let's see. Let's go to Stranger Things. And you type in Stranger Things here. And they move it around sometimes. So that's why it might be a little easier for you to go to Plugged In Movie Review to get specifics. But they have, there's a lot of great things. Obviously, this is a secular website, but this is the top place to come for learning about the films that are very relevant and interesting to you. So you can obviously use your phone and you can get the information that way. That's a good way of doing it. There are also ways to get specifics on different films. I'm going to see if it's in here. Creators, cast and crew, production. Parent's Guide. Okay, so on your phone, it's usually towards the top, but it's usually in this category. It goes storyline, taglines, genre, certificate, like what rating it is, and then Parent's Guide. And so the Parent's Guide is super helpful, and it gives you the top level categories right away, and then it actually, if you click into the category, it helps you break down what's actually happening in the scene. And so people have contributed what's a part of the film of what's happening, right? So, like, for instance, in, let's see, I don't know what season this is referencing. Usually it's easier for a film, but it also demonstrates things. There's a woman in a bikini in a photograph in one scene. There's some kissing. A young woman is seen shirtless wearing a bra. This would be season 1, okay? Things like that are demonstrated. That's probably the top category there. Violence and gore can be relevant. Depends on how you think about that. Profanity, there can be a lot of references, and they do a pretty good job documenting this and even giving you some demonstrations of what is actually in there. And of course, other helpful things. And they have a category for spoilers, so it's going to tell you things that are in it that's objectionable, but that also happen to have major plot point revelations. And so it keeps that as a separate category. So that's another really nice thing that I like about IMDb. So yeah, I use IMDb for my reviews of media. Plugged In, again, I'll do more plugs for Plugged In, definitely relevant. But yeah, we have to figure out how we kind of network and understand the media that we consume. Now, I want to do just a real brief analysis of what I believe happened in season 5. Okay, so season 5 of Stranger Things, they had been building a storyline and making Will clearly have it, but starting in season 4, we get the addition of another character that we are told immediately doesn't like the opposite gender, that likes the same gender. And that would be Robin, her character named Robin. And so in season 4, we reveal that that's who that is. And by the end of the season, we're actually given a demonstration of her LGBTQ lust in that regard. And so she was season 4, important character, side character, and the emphasis on it, very, very side quest. So very objectionable. We need to be pointing this out, why it's a problem. We need to be voicing when things like this happen on our media. For instance, there was another show that I was watching, Halo, and I watched the first season. The first season was actually fairly decent, but the second season was absolutely atrocious. It was so woke, and it was so broke. It was so messed up. And so I was in the forums because they watch these things. They watch these forums online, on Facebook, on Instagram, of course on YouTube trailers. The movie makers, the studios, they pay analytics and people internally to watch audience reactions. And so if you see a major movie reviewer, a major movie source, even the channel itself, like I'm going to show you one of them towards the end of our live stream directly from the channel itself, you can comment, and you should, as a Christian, voice when you see objectionable material that you do not want to be a part of the media that you're consuming. And of course, especially when it is unnecessary, right? Now, there's going to be some forms of media that will gravitate towards depictions, which are going to be difficult for you to censor out. For instance, in Schindler's List, you're going to get a lot of very objectionable content to portray it historically. Now, there are other scenes that are flash scenes, completely unnecessary, right? But you're dealing with one of the most dark periods in history. You're going to get very dark and very gritty experiences, which includes some nudity. Nudity. So that is when you're talking about the type of genre, be mindful of that as you're commenting. Don't just assume that everything should always be Leave It to Beaver, okay? But This is a good example. This show did not need the kind of objectionable content that they put in here. Like I said, in season 1, they had a scene where a teenager was in their underwear and being shown making out with one of the main characters, the two of the main characters. We didn't need to see that. We knew what was going to happen. They could have kissed and, done their thing, and then cut to, another scene showing teenagers in that kind of way. Zero necessity whatsoever. We don't need to see that. And so there were a lot of people objecting to that, and that's good. So we need to do this as Christians. We need to, when we consume media, we have to understand there are people. Don't just make a general post out there. You can do that if you tag. You can do that if you just go to your own social media preferred profile, and you could make a post about it if you want, just a completely organic post. And you can go in there and you can actually, when you're making the post, you can tag Stranger Things. You'll know it's the real one because usually they have the little badge right there, right? Most of the time. Now, sometimes there are other accounts that are sub accounts or parallel accounts, but usually this little blue badge, verified badge, can tell you that's the official channel. You can tag that and then make your comment and post, and they can see that content. Now, they might block you or untag it from there because it's critical of their show. But that you can do it from your own post if you don't want to find one of the pieces of media or wait to find one of the, or do both, right? But it's important to voice our concerns, especially in the age of social. The more people that do this, the more it significantly makes a difference, because the next programming is going to significantly change based on that kind of audience reaction. And if it's big enough, it will change. We did that with Snow White, the Snow White Disney movie. We made them basically completely shift and turn around the movie. That actually happened naturally, not because of anything woke, but it happened organically. Audience reaction to a trailer of the Sonic movie. When the first trailer of the first Sonic movie, animated movie came out, computer animated movie, live action version, it was so atrocious that anybody with any sense of the original comic character was disgusted by it, let alone people who didn't even know. It just looked terrible. And so it was to such a degree, the reaction online was to such a degree that it literally forced the movie to completely be regenerated. They regenerated that character, rebuilt the way it looked, and rebuilt the scene, put him back in all the different scenes they'd blocked out. Your voice matters. And the more people, the more Christians in particular that do this, the more it will actually be a light, right? So this is a key thing. When you are consuming films and they are putting objectionable content in films that are not grounded to do that, we need to voice our objection. And if you want to voice it loud and long, do it a lot. That's even better. Other people might get sick of it, but who cares? We need to stop Hollywood from continuing to do this. And if their investors continue to feel, the only companies that aren't going to do that are Disney. Disney is so ideologically woke from the core at this point. They are willing to lose major money on stuff because they're willing to push it. Most other studios are not like that. They are in it for the money. And so they don't want to push objectionable content to the degree that it would cause mass boycotts, right? They'll push it to the degree that we allow it, though. And so that's why it's important to say something. That when you see something, you say something. It may not happen right away, but over time, it shows to other people, it gives courage to other people to say something. So comment on those profiles, comment on the official channels, tag the official channels in that your voice matters. And so we're going to talk more about that in just a second. But Stranger Things had this scene in season 5 where they retconned, which means they decided to reinterpret the entire season, the entire show, in light of the climax of the movie. And a lot of these shows are being written in the moment. And when I watched the documentary to explain how they made season 5, which is this last season, you're seeing a frame from that here. They were writing it almost same day that they were filming it in certain areas. And so there was a significant revisionist intent in season 5 in particular. Now, they were definitely driving at it in season 4, definitely laying the groundwork a little bit in season 3, but in season 5, they did it specifically. And so I'm going to do a little bit of explaining here. They had a scene at the end where the character, it was a really big lead-up scene. It was literally the scene right before the main climax of action, the final battle. And they made this character, whose name is Will, he has been one of the main characters. He's been one of the core groups of people affected by this dark force in the other age, who's one of the three boys, the three friends of the crew. They made that scene. Now, the actor themselves has already been becoming gay, homosexual. And so they decided to make the main protagonist not only gay, but that his superpower couldn't be accessed, his abilities couldn't be accessed until not only he had a coming out moment, but that everybody accepted him. That was part of the thought of season 5, was that his ability to be gay openly and be accepted for it was what was going to allow him to defeat the bad guy. So one has to ask the question, who is the bad guy? When you ask that question, when you make the main thought of the film that they can't stop the bad guy unless they become gay, who's the bad guy? And again, this is retconned. This is not in I don't think, from what I can tell right now, this was not the intent from the origin of the show. But it became the intent. And when I watched season 5, I was so disgusted. Now, the storytelling and the quality of filmmaking, top notch. But they, unlike what usually happens is when a story gets woke, the plot goes to crap. And yes, there was a major part of that was a problem, and that I think weakened season 5 significantly by this moment. And more than that, a lot more that happened in the show. But I think ultimately that what was going on here was a strategic cultural warfare. I don't think people know about this. This is a culture war. This is no longer cultural discussions. This is a war for the souls and minds and bodies, all three, of the next generation. It is a war against Western culture. It is a war against the root of Western culture that gives Western culture its framework and order, which is the scriptures, God's order, and intent for humanity. This is what the war is actually about. So when you watch the edition of this show where they did a deliberate 180 of the meaning, narrative meaning of the good and evil, you got to start asking questions. What just happened? And so, by the way, this scene, which shows you their commitment to the wokeness, this scene that where he comes out, they spent 12 hours filming that monologue, and that scene required another 12 hours of reshoots. People don't know how much that is in movie making time. That is a lot of commitment to one scene. And I think the scene itself was already like 5 minutes, or at least like 8 minutes, something like that. And so thankfully, the fans, people in the 80s who liked 80s content, a lot of them didn't like what they did. Thank goodness that there is enough people who understand this and was able to comment and give them really, really bad reviews for that season. That season in particular is the worst performing season. That episode where he comes out, it's the second to last episode, is the worst performing episode in Netflix history because of what they did. They were willing to take the loss on that episode culturally. And I think we forget when this came out. So that's number 2. When this came out, on Christmas. What is Christmas? It's not Santa Claus. These people knew exactly what they were doing. Christmas is the time of year in which we celebrate Christ's lordship, his birth and his lordship. The centerpiece of the West is Jesus, and his birth is probably the biggest holiday. It is the biggest holiday that we celebrate in the West. Christmas. Jesus' birth. This show was fully, this episode, this last season, was held, this whole moment, on Christmas week. That was deliberate. On top of all the narrative storytelling that you get in the episode, which is freaky, how important they made the show. So I'm going to do a whole video breaking down the wokeness and I would say the distorted storytelling ethos of today, but specifically in Stranger Things. I was so disappointed by this show doing what they did to the story and retconning the whole narrative to say what I believe it said. It needs its own large multi-part analysis, which I'm going to do at some point here. I'm going to take this thing apart and I'm going to find out as things are kind of come out. The writers of the show are not going to stay quiet. They're going to start continuing to spout why they did what they did at this season. And people don't know. When you get to this season was so dark when it comes to the thought of where they were going with the show. It is my belief that what they did in this show was deliberately take the bad guy of the film and make a parallel between him, that guy, that's the monster that was controlling him, and God, Jesus, and the West. It is so evident, especially when you pay attention to the movie-making power that is being wielded here, non-verbally and through movie making. People don't know this. When you make a movie, everything that is put in the shot is made for a purpose, is deliberate. No, good movie makers like these guys and like all the greats in history never put anything in a shot that's completely random, unless the movie is about randomness. It is intentional. And everything they do symbolically, visually, while you're watching the narrative is deliberate. It is, in the movie making ethos, it's show, don't tell is one of the rules, principles. And the medium is the message. Show, don't tell, the media is the message. And of course, the dialogue adds to that, but in real movie making, the symbolism used throughout, and we're not talking about, I'm not talking about Bible coding, stuff and, I'm not talking about conspiracy theory nonsense. I'm talking about basic film analysis. And you watch this, it's going to draw upon actually some of the classic films in the horror genre during the 70s and 80s to use as metaphor in the scene. For instance, there's a lot of references to horror films like Jaws and The Thing, which is like sci-fi horror, and Alien and It, which I've never seen and I'm not going to, but I know about it because I've studied film. And all the different genres are being wielded all at the same time. That's why this film is so powerful, and people who are really big in 80s film buffs love the show because it's just packed full of it. Every square inch of it is just full of references. When you watch the 80s horror movies, there are core parts of the filmmaking that reveal the thought within the composition of the scene. And I believe that the intent of the filmmakers in season 5 was to deliberately switch the narrative to make the bad guy narratively, maybe not literally like one-for-one parallel, but narratively relational to Western ethics. Here's how this guy said it, which I think he just nailed it. Let's get this straight. The good guys are Hellfire Satanist Club. That's the name of the club. Who encourage fornication, perverted sexual desires, homosexuality, lying, do what thou wilt is one of the phrases of their club. And the big bad guy is half human, half transformational being, transdimensional being, who is abused by his father and wants to extend his rule into Earth. Remember, this came out on Christmas, this last season, this last book. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, extending his kingdom on earth. Peace on earth and mercy mild. Extend his rule on earth through pain and suffering. And was released on Christmas time when Americans celebrate the Incarnation. He says they're getting desperate. Yes, they are. This is deliberate, and a lot of people missed it. And they're going to think that, no, you're making things up. Too much. Way too much, especially when you pay attention. When you pay attention to the meaning, all of this, particularly season 5, but it's been deliberate all throughout. Colors are deliberately chosen in all scenes in season 5. Everything is deliberate, and this is one of the base things when you learn film. This is one of the main media communications is through color. What the color is adding to the meaning of what's going on. And you can interpret what the colors are based on what you're seeing in relationship to themselves over time. When this event happens, what's the color in the scene? When this event happens, what are this person wearing? What's going on in this moment? All of the costuming and lighting, all chosen deliberately. It was deliberate that they wanted to make this film about someone who's half a transdimensional being using his father in another dimension who controls him, coming to Earth, and how they position this, which I'll do a deeper analysis of this for the gay thing, was that those people who have children or people who have experienced incredible pain through someone getting hurt in their family, someone getting, harmed sexually in their family life. They've gone through pain and suffering. And so God's come to what? He is to heal the pain and suffering. But for an LGBTQ pro person, they're not broken. Their pain and suffering, they're feeling like they're a different person now. And they have different desires now, is part of them, and is a feature, not a bug. And it's to be celebrated. And it's to be morphed into however I want to feel in the moment, and mutilate the flesh to do it. And that some people, the narrative tells you that some people are under his spell because they tell you you're suffering. You're harming yourself. Don't harm yourself. And so they pivot the narrative to what an LGBTQ person sees God, the God of the Bible, doing. Or one could say Western culture in archetypal relationship to the God of the Bible. It's probably how they're more figuring it. Is that they are trying to capture young people to serve a higher dimensional being. They use the pain and suffering they've experienced to draw them in, which is what the point of the story is. And they pivoted this to basically be that God is Jack the Ripper. And they strategically place kids who represent in the kids who are deceived by the bad guy. I don't know if I can find it visually just in this summary here. They strategically place kids who represent the Karen of the 80s as a child, right? Who's been told by other Karens, who's been told by the spirit of the age in their mind of the 80s, which was Christianity, to accept the bad guy into their heart. It's extremely dark. And so I'm going to do a deeper dive into all this in future coming up. We have to be preparing ourselves for the kind of warfare we're going to experience in the 21st century. They are coming after your kids through everything they can, and you can't not have them engage with life. You can't just pull them away and cloister them. If you do that, they're going to be susceptible when you're not around. You have to teach them how to see what's happening, what they're trying to do. You have to show the game that they're playing like this. I actually want to do a whole class on watching, for teenagers, watching Pleasantville, which is a 90s movie, and the Barbie movie, which came out in 2024, 2025. They are extremely similar, but they are extremely hyper woke and intent on destroying Western civilization. Those two films. You compare them, and they are incredibly manipulative and dark. And Barbie is even more manipulative because the girls who are more heterosexual minded are going to play with Barbies, and they're going to want to see the Barbie movie. So we're talking about warfare on every front, and we have to know how to not just not consume it. You have to know how to see it to prove what they're doing to your children and to the general public and call it out. You have to know how to interpret these things. You have to be able to do it. You have to be equipped to do it. It is not easy. I have spent a lifetime learning how to interpret story. That has literally been my core of what I'm about. And in particular, reflecting media, it is a very complex thing. Now, there are parallels that you can pick up and find easy things right away because sometimes they're just being open with it. But we have to be prepared for this world in which we live, and we have to prepare others. And mind you, for those who feel that this is the whole hope is lost and that we're going to be out of here. Oh my gosh, America's going downhill. We're going to die. We're just going to be the world is going to. The doom and gloomers, they're out strong. The doom and gloomers are out strong. But I need them to start paying attention. Look at this. Tucson Pride Festival organizers cancel LGBTQ event and dissolve group. Now let's listen real quick. This is going long.
The Tucson Pride Festival next month is canceled. The Tucson Pride organization has shut down after nearly 50 years in southern Arizona. The Pride Board of Directors made that announcement on the group's website. It hasn't provided any reasons why, though. The Pride Festival was set to take place February 21st. The newly appointed board says it made the difficult decision to close as an organization. It says refunds for the festival will be issued within 30 to 90 days.
In a statement, the Tucson Pride Board of Directors says this decision was not made lightly. We recognize the deep importance Tucson Pride has held in our community since 1977, serving as a space of visibility, advocacy, celebration, and resilience for nearly 5 decades. We are profoundly grateful to every volunteer, sponsor, artist, activist, and community member who has supported Tucson Pride throughout its history.
So this is deliberate that we have had a massive impact pushing back on wokeness. Whole groups are dissolving. Festivals are being canceled. It's even happened in my area. Canceled stuff. Why? Because we're pushing back. My friends, darkness doesn't grow just because darkness is powerful. Darkness grows because light receded. Because light has turned itself off from showing itself in the world. That's why this darkness grew. We've allowed our children to be discipled by wicked people in the school system and in the media. And now a lot of boomers, adult children are not following Jesus. And as a matter of fact, are fully embracing this. We've given our kids over to Satan. Even though we raised them here, we gave them over to the world system. And because we've retreated from being in leadership of our society, this stuff happened. The Rainbow Rebellion in 2020 and everything else happened. 2020 happened because Christians stepped back from being leaders of society. But now that conservative Christians are standing up and taking back the public square for Christ and for godly biblical order and nature, the darkness is going away. The light makes the darkness cower and scared. And they'll still lash out. That's what Charlie Kirk was. The darkness will still lash out. But darkness only grows when light recedes, friends. This is on us. We have had an impact. You still feel overwhelmed by the state of the world? Welcome to what Jesus said. You will experience persecution. Well, but we're just supposed to be suffering and just die for Jesus. God may call you to die for him, but it's not by cowering in your church or in your home and waiting for the jackboots to break down your door, which is what's happening over in Minnesota. It's none of the martyrs of history in the church were martyred because they were just sitting quietly to themselves being nice people. And were just nice to everybody and then were killed. No, they were out there because they were bringing the light into the darkness. Where the people in the darkness wanted to hide, enjoy their darkness, revel in their darkness, and the light was coming right into them and going, Jesus has come to earth. He is Lord. He has not made you for this. Repent and be restored to the God who made you, or judgment will befall you. That is the job of the Christian. We need to be doing this. This is what we have. We can continue this effort. There are many other examples. Go look at Robbie Starbuck on X. Go scroll through his platform. How about Robbie Starbuck in particular has done at least 12 organizations, huge corporate enterprises, who has, with him and his network, forced these companies through our public voice together, standing up and saying, we will not patron companies that break the basic building blocks of society that God has made. We will not. The question is, are you willing to join that fight? Every single one of us has to voice when there's a problem. When you don't give an indication there's a problem, then it's silence is complacency. They will continue to run until they are met with an equal opposition force. And the equal opposition force is, this is wicked. We're not going to allow it in our community. That's what God is calling us to do. So there's a lot more I could say here. I wanted to talk a little bit about AI and stuff like that. There's some great movies. Maybe I will mention this. A lot of people are dooming and glooming, then saying we'll never be able to make movies with Hollywood, and so we're just, we just can't. We're just going to have to be at the mercy of Hollywood. No. And by the way, we don't have to be at the mercy of Mormons who are making films either. We don't have to they're the only ones who are making these big films. We have to just support the Mormons. No, we don't. As AI is getting more powerful, look at this. This is a comp shot. I don't know if you know what that is. You're taking a live action shot that you're shooting with a basic camera. What we used to do, and if you've seen these in probably special features, what we used to do is we used to just have these people in gear and with little dots on this big costume. And the special effects artist would take the render and start to render based on what's in the shot. And so it's comping in the direction, the movement of the screen, what you want the thing to be and to do. as kind of a baseline edit for what you want to do with the end product here for this computer graphics. This is now happening with a few prompts in AI. Look at this. Look at this. So the comp is at the top, the render is at the bottom. Those were foam pads just lined up. It's mimicking the movement of the camera. You still have to know what you're doing with filmmaking. Now, again, this is going to continue to even get better. Look at that. A kid in his house can make a whole sci-fi film and look legit. Okay, look at that. This is the future. And we don't have to be scared of AI to understand what it's going to allow us to do. We will be able to create great films for Christ, not just ones that are set in the Bible day, those two, but not just one set in the Bible day. Films that teach us biblical ethics like we once did in all the other stories, things like Narnia. We'll be able to make our own versions of that from our bedrooms. Pretty much, from our house. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know how filmmaking works. You have to know how to write story. You have to know how to direct the AI to do all this. It is very challenging. It is not simply, boom, produce an AI slop. No, you have to really know what you're doing still, but it will allow us to be able to compete and for the messaging of the Lordship of Christ. And yes, should we be doing the big productions as God gives us the ability to? Absolutely. Should we be able to compete with Stranger Things, making our own version in a biblical worldview without being hallmarky? Yes, we can and we will, as God continues to move people to engage in this battle. But we can also do it individually to the degree that God gives us the ability to do it. And we do not have to wait for millions and millions of dollars and a bunch of people to go do it. You can learn it if you've got, $300. Probably this kind of software typically is about $300 a month. So it's still an investment for about what it would be for a car payment. You can make a Hollywood movie if God's calling you to. This is what we have to recognize. We are no longer in the age of we're out of control of society. We can take it back. And that's what God's calling us to do. Also, very interesting. We're going to see, we don't know what they might throw in there. Okay. Nolan, one of the greatest movie makers of all time. This is a film I'm looking forward to watching. I have not watched the trailer yet, so I'm going to watch the trailer with you, and then we're going to close out for our day.
After years of war, no one could stand between my men and home. Not even me.
promise me you will come back.
What if I can't?
I don't know about you. That looks truly phenomenal. Phenomenal. This is the website for the Odyssey. Christopher Nolan, obviously being the maker of The Dark Knight, Inception, so many other great films, so many other Interstellar, many great films. Filmed in IMAX with IMAX Films, the entire thing, which is groundbreaking. New IMAX in particular, new film that they've developed. And of course, Nolan he loves IMAX cameras. He did all sorts of innovative stuff with making Oppenheimer. And so this is going to be phenomenal. Now, I seriously can't wait to watch this film. When we get the preliminary reviews that come in, it's going to be questionable. We are setting it back in an ancient time period in which there was a lot of sex slavery. It is very possible that Nolan could put objectionable content in here, which would prevent me, what I've been able to do, to go to see it in studios or in movies. I try not, when a film has been revealed, to have open sexual nudity in it. I don't want to go and support the film with my money. And so that's my decision. I don't bind anybody else's conscience about that, but I think there's some basics there. And so what I try to do is, I have a friend who, whether or not they've got a PureFlix or whatever they've chosen to do, have edited the film in some regard. And so I've been able to watch edited versions like I did with Oppenheimer, which allowed me to enjoy the film without the objectionable content and not have to pay for the viewing. And so it's a difficult kind of case-by-case basis. I try not to make a hard and fast rule across the board. You don't know what's going to come up, and there are things that people throw in to films that are otherwise great films that should be watched without that content. And so I'm going to be paying attention, and you'll be, as time gets closer to the 17th of July, that would be something I'll be looking for is updates about that. But this is a good example of a story that's a mythology. And what a myth ultimately is that the story is framed to such a degree that each of the characters and how they are portrayed become archetypes, or basically what we today call memes, in which you can take a character and the way in which that character is in the story, and you can overlay other, if you would, skins, okay, different looks, different people, but they're the same kind of character, right? So their mythology is a major part in that, and discussing the role of people with powers, people with abilities, impacting how regular people engage with all the craziness of life. And so in a good example here, Greek myth blended the Greek mythology, Greek storytelling, whether it's the nonfiction or fiction, they blended oftentimes Greek myth within their way of understanding the story as part of the metaphor to explain what happened. Zeus struck him down with his spear, and it was one of the armies of one of the other guys who launched this thing and killed people. Like it was explaining it using metaphor, using the religion of their day to understand what happened in our events. And so because they have formed such an important part archetypally of our narrative structure in the West, these films being made and hopefully faithfully adapted for screen are going to be extremely powerful and relevant. It's also relevant to know Nolan, he still is in Hollywood. And so it is very possible that there could be some historical revisionism. There's already questions about the some of Agamemnon, which is the main the main bad guy in the story, and questionable whether or not he's entirely a bad guy. But the question on whether or not that guy could ever look like that, right? From what we know of, not really, not exactly. So there's going to be some little play that is going to happen in a modern story in the way it's depicted. And so it's important. This gives you the opportunity when you go watch a great film that's made but adapted for modernity. It's important to return, particularly if you can or beforehand, to the original source material and read that first. Engage with the source material first before you engage with the story, because this can set your framework to understand the story. Now, that's not entirely hugely a problem. You can still correct bad history when you go and study it afterward. And that is one of the most difficult things to discuss amongst people who are true historians, people in museums. They generally don't like pop culture because they get so many things wrong. And so they don't want to use pop culture in referencing anything they do in museum context. But let me tell you, pop culture is popular. So if you want people to show up, frame it in a popular way and people will show up, and then you can correct all the things that you need to correct. And so this is a very important discussion. This is also a very relevant discussion when we talk about portraying anything biblical. That's a huge discussion. And I've really, it's a difficult topic, and we'll have to talk about that the next opportunity. I'm sure there's going to be one coming up very soon, in which Gibson is going to do a second version of the Passion, and that's going to give us a whole nother series of opportunities to talk about how do we adapt faithfully things on film, and then what do we do as Christians in consuming it. Obviously, we can consume it, but the question is, how much do we promote it? And I have had very good discussions with people who have promoted some of these larger films. There's one man in particular who maybe at some point I'd love to have him on and have a dialogue on one of these live streams here to talk about maybe how do we think through and process where our boundaries should be when, as Christians, consuming content and supporting it, when it doesn't fully match the biblical accuracy in particular, which is even more important than just general historical accuracy. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm definitely going to see it. Whether or not I'm going to see it in films, in theaters, which would be tragic if I couldn't, but is yet to be determined. So thanks for joining me if you stayed with me a little longer. Looking forward to next week. You can join me 7 o'clock live here on Facebook, Thursday night, 7 o'clock. I'll be streaming, or I'll occasionally, if I can't live stream that day for some reason, something comes up, I'll record something and have it post around that time if I can, so that you guys can get an update on what's happening out there in the spheres of our society and how should we be processing it as Christians. So thank you for joining me today. That is all of our time we have today. So thanks a lot. I look forward to seeing you next time.